Monster Hunter Wilds is the most recent game in the Monster Hunter franchise, and at least in my own opinion, the greatest of the variety. For a plethora of reasons, Monster Hunter Wilds has really resonated with me. The variety and selection of both new and returning monsters, the storyline progression, but most of all, the vast and sprawling landscapes that said monsters call home. Over my time playing the likes of World and Rise, my mindset found its way to be less focused on the story and more wanting to hit a monster hard with the femur of its cousin. It can be boiled down to follow the beaten path until block, then kill the block and keep following the beaten path. But throughout my time playing Wilds and eventually taking the time to really take in the surroundings, environment and weather cycles, the world made sense to me. The monsters, both returning and new, made sense for where they were in the Forbidden Lands. The abilities they had made sense for their locales, and even things as far down as behaviors and interactions between the endemic life, aquatic life, even the flora made sense for the locales they were found in. And Wilds is a game that is constantly evolving and adapting, with the first free title update monster being, of course, spoiler alert, Mizitsune, the second title update monster, of course, being, spoiler alert, Lagiacris, and the likely return / future title update monsters being, spoiler alert, an assortment of Seregios, Zenoga, Gogmazios, Shigara Magala, etc. It got me thinking which other monsters could realistically come back, for example in DLC coming in around a year, and whether or not they would make sense ecologically or not. And so I've looked back through all of the monsters present in Monster Hunter, and I've done what I think is my best to come up with 4 monsters to return for each of the 5 locales, 1 brand new Craddock original creation subspecies variant deviant monster for each locale, and 2 big boss monsters I think could make realistic sense to return to the Forbidden Lands. 27 new monsters to match the 27 monsters introduced in World's DLC Iceborne. A quick disclaimer though, again, this is what I think is my best. I may not be in the right in some areas, I may not be completely clued in on others, and to make things work I have had to, in minor cases, tweak, and in major cases retcon or make up certain points. But at the end of the day, I'm not Oceaniz or David Attenborough. I'm trying my best. But without further ado, let's venture into the future of the Forbidden Lands and delve into my ecologically sensible picks for returns. The Windward Plains, the first locale of the Forbidden Lands, is an area consisting of plenty of different sub-regions, as I'll call them. The first being a golden savanna. Trees and streams compile themselves in the northern portion of this locale, making this area the liveliest of them all, with the likes of Gyjos, Seratanoth, Talioth, beings as small as insects and as large as leviathans, all find themselves here for one reason or another. The second being a large cave system consisting of large winding fulgurite canyons and jagged rock structures. Fulgurite is a type of ore that is produced when lightning strikes sand, which causes a reaction that produces the large pillars that can be seen throughout the whole northwest region of the Windward Plains. The canyons themselves provide shade for some monsters hoping to escape from the harsh desert sun, and protection for others hoping to escape something a little more threatening. And the third and final sub-region, a large, ever-present desert, towering sand dunes being all that was believed to be here for centuries. A vast landscape of dust and nothingness. A fourth, smaller area can be found, although not big enough to be classified as its own sub-region. A large crescent-shaped monument dubbed by the people of Kunafa as the Wind's Gasp, a structure that seems to be the hub for lightning strikes, with most of the Windward Plains inclemency deciding to strike this location. As a result, the ground is heavily saturated in fulgurite, with visible signs of electric charge and audible humming resonating from the ground. This area is the nest of the Windward Plains apex Raidao, and so all other monsters, large or otherwise, stray far from this location. The Wind's Gasp is shrouded in mystery regarding its origin. Is it just a large rock formation created by eons of fulgurite production, or is it the last known relic of an ancient civilization that once inhabited this land? The answer, unfortunately, seems to have been lost to time. Speaking back on the inclemency, the Windward Plains is subject to nature's wrath, with a large sand and lightning storm overwhelming all those out in the open. Lightning strikes far more than regular here, with the majority striking some of the same locations. The Wind's Gasp, as mentioned earlier, is one, the other being the large monolith-like structures present in every sub-region of the plains. These large rounding spikes show runes on them which could hint towards an ancient civilization, but are yet to be deciphered. During the Sand Tide, on top of the Wind's Gasp and Monoliths, there actually exists a third location that the lightning will strike regularly, that being the carapace of the Ceratinoth, specifically the males. The males have large spikes, almost miniature monoliths attached to their carapace, and during sandstorms they use their large spikes to channel any lightning strikes. This process sometimes causes fulgurite to form on parts of their bodies. While this does solidify them as a pack leader, it does also put them in the visible sight of the Rajang. Rajang are extremely aggressive, extremely territorial monsters that rival the likes of even elder dragons, specifically preying on Kirin for the horns. The electrical charge of the horns provide enough energy for the Rajang to make use of its inner electrical organ, providing it with the ability to turn Super Saiyan, for lack of a better term. This gives them a gold and yellow color to their fur, as well as the ability to wield lightning as projectiles, whether that be a beam or in globs. However, due to the Rajang being an invader and again extremely territorial, some Rajang have been forced out of their respective territory since there is only so much land to go around. The existence of the Rajang in the Forbidden Lands could be boiled down to the Rajang, for whatever reason, being kicked out of its original place of residence and so finds the plains. A large green area with water, as well as a large cavern area with shade, a perfect replacement. The absence of Kirin available to provide it with its power, the suitable replacement is the male Ceratinoth. Whilst fulgurite may not hold nearly as much of an electrical charge as a Kirin's horn, the abundance of the Ceratinoth in all sub-regions of the plains more than makes up for it. The Rajang will continue to feed on the Ceratinoth as a replacement for its usual diet, the likes of Kestodon, etc. Since Rajang requires electrical energy to be strong, it is the only monster ballsy enough to venture to the Wind's Gasp, where if it meets a Raidao, it will fight them for the right of the territory. Raidao's wings are coated in a large blade-like form of fulgurite, which the Rajang will actively target as well. And since the Raidao has a mastery of lightning, this provides the Rajang with a much greater electrical charge and a lot more power than the Ceratinoth. Rajang's nature as an invader means that it is likely to be found in every single locale present. However, it is more than likely that its first appearance in the Forbidden Lands would be in the Windward Plains. The Windward Plains consists of relatively calm creatures, the likes of Chatacabra and Quematrice, never traditionally starting a fight. There are very rarely instances when the guild will issue a kill order on rumours of a monster, but the case is indeed so when it comes to the Astalos. The Astalos is another extremely aggressive monster, taking the mantle of second in the food chain. It will attack with or without prior aggravation or engagement, and will sometimes even throw a punch when the opponent isn't looking. Found present in every sub-region of the Windward Plains, the Astalos will commonly feed on monsters such as Bulakchi, Talioth, but most of the time will target larger monsters and male Ceratinoth for the same reason the Rajang does. Despite the title of second, the Astalos can give Raidao a run for its money in certain scenarios. However, due to both of these monsters wielding similar styles of attack and abilities, the battle is hard to decide until one or the other emerges victorious. There is little to no change to the Astalos at face value. Its attacks remain the same for the most part. However, the Astalos abilities and moveset will change drastically depending on what time of day it is. During the fallow and plenty, the Astalos will continue to use its passive ability of piezoelectricity to continue to build up enough of an electrical charge to become enraged and utilize its lightning attacks a lot more efficiently. However, the bravest of hunters wishing to prove themselves worthy of guild merit will instead choose to fight in the Sand Tide. The constant lightning strikes that flood the locale will ever be present in the Sand Tide and provides the perfect advantage for the Astalos. It will use the crest on its head in a very similar manner to the large runed grounding pillars found throughout the plains, conducting the lightning strikes onto its location. Receiving one of these strikes will bypass the passive electricity buildup and will instantly put the Astalos at full power, and in some instances in a state even further beyond, which the guild has officially recognized as its Bolt Reaver state. Normally, the Bolt Reaver state is a form that the Astalos cannot hold for long and will exhaust itself quickly. However, with the crest acting as a conductor and the Sand Tide providing constant charge, the Bolt Reaver state can persist for a lot longer, making the fight with an Astalos a much heavier task than some first thought. For the villagers of Kunafa, when word is received about this monster in the area close to the inclemency period, they run for shelter and do not exit until it passes. Their defense chimes that mimic Raidao, providing seemingly little to no security while Astalos roams free. This, in some cases, could suggest the mantle of second trend is only temporary, as the Windward Plains could have a new apex in due course. The Belakchi are a small class of Neopterans found present only in the Fulgurite caves. They prefer to attack from above, clinging onto walls and ceilings, using the feelers on their many legs to map out their surroundings. Traditionally taking the role of a decomposer, they will inject their thin, mosquito-like trunk into a corpse, injecting it with stomach acid to dissolve it instantly, the gooey sludge produced then being sucked back up through the same trunk as food. Sometimes, however, they will attack a stray Saratanoth if it's strays too far from its pack, but will rarely kill itself. For a while it had been unreported why this occurs, but one lucky Kunafa villager brought news as to why. Belakchi are not the only Neopterans to inhabit the Fulgurite caves. The Celtus and the Celtus Queen also find themselves calling it home. They will stay put in caves, and it is an extremely rare occurrence to see a Celtus venture outside, even rarer to see the Queen do so. So rare in fact that any Kunafans that claim to have seen it are met with jabs of, "You need to stay away from the basin," suggesting its fumes have caused hallucinations. The reason why the Celtus and Celtus Queen are rarely spotted in the desert or plains is only due to its two weaknesses. The Sandtide and the apex of the Windward Plains provide plentiful lightning to the land, that which the Celtus are weak to. If a Raidau is present or the Sandtide is ongoing, both will never leave from its Fulgurite cavern, despite the oasis in Area 13 of the desert being the only accessible source of water for the two. The Celtus alone will only rarely be spotted having a drink, and if some sightseers are lucky, they will see the Celtus prepare a meal for its queen. This can consist of Saratanoth, Talioth, and large monster corpses being left behind by the Raidau or the lightning strikes, or unlucky hunters or villagers that will be snatched up from a Balahara sinkhole. The green sub-region of the Windward Plains would, at an initial observation, provide the perfect habitat for a Celtus and the queen. Plenty of Saratanoth to play on, trees for shade, and streams for water. However, the other weakness the Celtus possesses is that of fire, an ability that which the Quematrice and the Rathian both use in abundance. Since both of these monsters also make this sub-region their nesting place, their presence in all times of the cycle is almost a guarantee, unless a hunter wishing to increase his hunter profile numbers has come through and gotten rid of all of them. In the instances a hunter is permitted to fight both of these monsters, the Celtus and Queen will fight in a similar manner that most are used to by now. The nature of the Fulgurite structures, however, mean that continued recklessness of the Celtus and Queen combo can either collapse pillars on them or create environmental aids for the hunters to take advantage of. However, its continued existence in this area means it is well versed in escaping threats and awareness of its surroundings, so those looking for an easy fight should stay put. If not, then it is the job of the Belakchi to continue the circle of life. The Sandtide spoils are left in abundance throughout the Windward Plains, and every party that believes it is worth something seeks after it. The Kunafan villagers use it for trading purposes between them and the Avis unit, and also whittle it down to shards that, when hung from ropes above their village, gentle breeze cause them to mimic a Raidau cry to scare off any possible threats. The guild also sees the valuable nature of these crystals, selling them for 100 zeni apiece, and with its unique ability to hold a small electrical charge for a time, the technological advancement potential surely would make Werner a happy man. Even the likes of the Thundering Fulgurites are amongst the rarest items currently attainable in the Windward Plains. Entire cave systems are created of this stuff, perhaps even the Wind's Gasp. One place you may not expect to see much of it would be the desert areas of 12, 13, and 16. Whilst lightning does strike here in the Sandtide, and Raidau can create them itself, they typically don't stay around for too long due to vibrations of passing Balahara either rapidly eroding the rocks or crumbling them straight away. Even so, these Fulgurite strains are covered in a sand-covered rock, a surefire sign that the crystals some may see plain as day in the middle of the desert may not be all that meets the eye. Unfortunately, those that let curiosity get the better of them soon learn too late that the crystal they'd thought was rare research opportunities or a quick way to make some zeni was instead not a Fulgurite crystal at all, but a monster's tail. A tail that belongs to a long-thought extinct species, the Akura Vashimu. The Akura Vashimu are nocturnal creatures that lure prey in by exposing only their tail tip while burrowing deep in the sandy dunes of the desert. The crystals, while solid, are actually made of a liquid secreted by the Akura Vishimu for one of three main purposes. The first being an internal body temperature gauge. Notoriously, deserts are impossibly hot during the day and freezing overnight, a negative that the Akura can bypass either by heightening or lowering its internal body temperature using this liquid. The second being a healing factor. The liquid is secreted passively from the tail, meaning that if the Akura gets a damaged claw or leg, all it needs to do is slather some of the liquid on the afflicted area and the crystal will act as a natural bandage. The third and arguably most lethal reason is that the liquid, once crystallized, will explode if detached from the main body. This provides plenty of ways for the Akura to attack, from shooting the liquid at foes to crystallize and explode, or laying them down as traps for prey. The Akura Vishimu will most of the time prey on Saratanoth and Talioth in the desert subregion, and for the majority of the time has little need to worry. However, just before and just after the sand tide, these monsters can be seen in far fewer numbers taking shelter from the lightning. When this happens, the Akura Vishimu uses its crystals in a frighteningly intelligent manner. The mandibles of the Akura Vishimu are incredibly powerful, capable of crushing ores at will. In case of extreme hunger, it will venture out into the Fulgurite caves where it will carve itself a Vishimu-sized hole and will solidify a crystal wall with its tail once hidden. From here, it will wait for an unsuspecting Chaticabra, Doshiguma, or Quematrice to pass by, where it will strike with frightening accuracy and speed, providing the Akura Vishimu with its next meal. Many species of the New World inhabit only specific areas of the region, either not daring to venture out or nature somehow prohibiting them from doing any different. It is not certain how species like Uragan, Baroth, Barioth, etc. all made their way from the Old World to the New, and it is even more perplexing when a monster originating in the New World makes the return journey. You can imagine the shock that when researchers discovered a New World species in the Forbidden Lands, it was one of the species that no one thought would ever step a foot outside of its natural habitat. The Elder's Recess is a locale ripe in volcanic atmosphere and shrouded in darkness, being home to plentiful high-threat monsters, the likes of Teostra, Lunastra, Kushala, Kirin, Nergigante, Betelgeuse, Brachydios, just to name a few. One small exception, the runt of the region, was the Dodo Gamma. Dodo Gamma can be found in abundance throughout the Elder's Recess for the simple fact that no one dared to hurt him, or hunters forced to hunt would capture instead, provide the research required before the Dodo Gamma would be released to its natural habitat. The Dodo Gamma eventually fell victim to overcrowding, and more species made the Elder's Recess its home, which essentially forced the Dodo Gamma to move elsewhere, being the bottom of the food chain. Nobody knows how it happened, or when, or why, but researchers of Avis Unit discovered a subspecies of Dodo Gamma within the Windward Plains, having somehow made the migration and adapted to its new surroundings. The Dodo Gamma gorged itself initially on the volcanic rock of the Elder's Recess. Storing it in its jaw, it would then either digest or use as a weapon. Upon migrating, the Dodo Gamma's diet changed from the volcanic rock to the fulgurite found in abundance throughout the Windward Plains, the continued sand tide making this a renewable food source. Consuming enough of it changed the Dodo Gamma, its colour going from the deep blue and orange highlights to a cloudy grey body with light blue highlights that hum with electrical song, much like the wind's gasp. The electrical energy the fulgurite stores gets absorbed by the Dodo Gamma when it feasts, with some providing energy and the rest to imbue the rock stored in its jaw. The Dodo Gamma now no longer shows signs of volcanic fire-based attack, but rather spews out rocks tainted with thunder element instead. The guild has recognized this as an official subspecies and has given it the name the Galvanic Dodo Gamma. The Galvanic Dodo Gamma is distinguished by having a thunderproof hide, being found roaming during the sand tide, being hit with a lightning bolt and continuing with its day. As well as the rocks the Galvanic Dodo Gamma can hurl at predators, its saliva also carries properties capable of causing paralysis. The Galvanic Dodo Gamma, though, is only a lithophage and only uses this paralysis ability in a bid for self-defense or escape. It no longer has the thunder weakness its cousin had, but it's still very weak to poison damage attacks. It does share some similarities with the base Dodo Gamma, having been seen regularly throughout all sub-regions of the Windward Plains. The Knuffin villagers run into it more than often. Both seem to want nothing to do with one another and so pay each other no mind. However, some children do decide to push their luck and ride it, where it will comedically throw them off before making a hasty escape. Hasty in the Dodo Gamma's eyes, at the very least. As the second locale made available to hunters, the Scarlet Forest is a drastic change in environment. Whilst the Windward Plains is made up of cave systems, deserts, and a small amount of greenery, the Scarlet Forest is a dense, sprawling woodland renowned for the trees having a striking crimson foliage and being so omnipresent that the leaves, perpetually tinted with shades of red and green, cast a permanent twilight upon half the forest floor. The treetops, however, play a different role in the locale. Venturing high atop the trees, you are met with either vast platforms and walkways perfect for setting up camps or nests, as the Yankut and the Wraths have done so, or the remains of countless buildings, ruins, and relics. This again could be the remains of an ancient civilization responsible for the wind's gasp, but the constant growth of moss, algae, and vines make it difficult to distinguish any distinct origin. The resident species of the forest, the woodwards, are a feline-type creature that have existed in the forest long before any hunter. They use their expert scavenging skills to provide for themselves and have made one of the ruined buildings their home. If a hunter wishes to ask for their assistance, they may ask a tall task to be performed, but the tallest task of them all is to understand what the woodwards have actually asked you to do. The forest's floor, for the most part, consists of winding rivers that all flow from a single point through plentiful streams and rivers, and all to a focal point that leads to the Windward Plains. These streams have a very interesting cycle to it, as the water will remain a crystal clear colour during the plenty. During this period, the large amount of endemic life will roam in abundance, the dilapidons settling in packs, the conger roaming around with their alpha, the congalala, even the likes of smaller endemic life such as the Strigian, Himstrigian, Dapperwing, and Dazzlewings will all coexist in the forest, the water they all rely on flowing in abundance. However, the countless trees that make up the bottom floor will also secrete sap when the season enters the fallow, that which is either ingested by the variety of jewel scarabs that inhabit the forest, or will slowly flow into the water, giving it its striking scarlet colour which the forest's name is derived from. Not many monsters can be seen during this period, as only the likes of Gyjos and Pirigil for the most part roam around in the streams. During the forest's inclemency, the downpour, a torrential, unrelenting storm will overcast the forest. The rain will bruise and batter anything caught within it, but its most important role is flushing out the sap of the trees. As the downpour rains heavier and heavier, the displacement of the scarlet water leads the locale back to the plenty, where the crystal clear water is present once more. The Kurapeko is a monster that, as some researchers believe, has actually been present in the Scarlet Forest for a lot longer than the Avis unit, perhaps as long as the Woodwards. Kurapeko, as bird wyverns, naturally take to nesting on the canopies of the forest, however, for plentiful number of reasons, have been seen less and less in the locale due to, some researchers believe, the Kurapeko being focused on a repopulation effort. Due to the large variety of large monsters present in the Scarlet Forest, the canopies can sometimes become a bit of a battleground. As previously mentioned, both the Wraths and the collections of Yankut all make this part of the forest their home, and so will fight for their territory. If this does happen, the Kurapeko can call upon another monster to help out with its cause, but this will most of the time cause a domino effect, where the monster leader summoned will also turn on the Kurapeko once the first threat has been handled. The same goes for the chicks, as once they hatch, will begin to perfect their song and dance routine. However, this either leads to the chick losing its balance in dance and falling through the canopy to the forest floor, or the chick practicing its Rathalos cry, inadvertently calling one to the nest, signing its own death warrant. However, since the arrival of the Avis units to the forest and the subsequent rampages of both Uthduna and Arkveld taken care of, the guild was able to focus more on eliminating threats to the forest ecosystem and the woodwards when required, the notable targets being Rathian, Rathalos, and Yankut. The constant monitoring of the numbers of said monsters has meant that the Kurapeko can repopulate in peace, meaning that they can be seen at least a little more commonly throughout the forest. The Kurapeko maintains its relatively simple fighting style for the most part, using its throat sac to continue giving itself healing buffs, etc., and will use its flint-like wings to create fire attacks. This fire won't cause too much damage if it connects with a hunter, however, due to the denseness of the forest, the fire will stay on the ground and spread a lot faster than, for example, the fire from Quemetrese's tail swabs in the plains, causing significant tick damage if left unchecked. The Kurapeko Kiurapeko's ability to call upon help will always be the one it utilizes the most. However, due to the differences in seasons, the call-up tends to be different every time. Witnesses have recounted seeing a Doshiguma, a Wrath, or a Lalabarina in the fallow and plenty, but when fighting in the inclemency, the Kiurapeko will seemingly always look to the likes of Uthduna for aid, but knowing the risk of doing so, it will flee from the fight almost as soon as the knight in shining armor appears. One very unlucky hunter has also recounted a time he was forced to abandon a Kiurapeko hunt due to the call summoning an Arkveld. Hunters rarely deviate from a task they are given and take great pride in their work. When one such hunter was given the task of slaying a Congalala that had destroyed and eaten more than enough pop-up camps in the last day or so, there was no hesitation before their armor and hammer were out the door. However, they were chastised upon returning, as instead of slaying the beast as was instructed, they brought it back with them. The argument was made that the Congalala was not entirely well put together, as when they first encountered it, it was swiping away at a small tree and celebrating when a thing fell. Not normal behavior for Congalala. After doing this twice more, it walked away and fell asleep mid-stride, whilst the Conga it was with scattered, as if frightened of something, and so after a few trank bombs, the monster was brought back to study. Researchers decided that the Congalala had been afflicted with something, making it think the trees and all the pop-up camps were prey to attack and eat. Something the researchers only described as confusion, a status known only utilized by one monster. Malfestio is a nocturnal monster, meaning it will never come out to hunt on the lower levels during the day, instead deciding to hunt at night. Its main source of food, being a carnivore, will range from Dilathodons, sometimes going for individuals that find themselves strayed from a pack, or the young if the pack is too dense. They may even go after a conga or the carrion of dead monsters, depending on how ravaged the landscape of the forest is after the day's events. During the nights, the Malfestio can be found amongst all areas of the forest, using its deep blue feathers as camouflage amongst the darkened tint of the tree shadows. Being top predators in their own right, they can hold their own against most monsters. However, it is important to note the Malfestio will never appear during the downpour, as it has real trouble with the likes of Uthduna and Mizutsune due to weakness to water. Through constant surveillance and experience, the majority of hunters looking for a cool new hat will go after a Malfestio during the day. During this period, the Malfestio will nest, and if disturbed, only choose to fight in the upper layers of the forest, as the red and orange canopies provide the most amount of protection. The Wraths and Yankutku traditionally are the only other monsters to live upon the top layer of the forest. However, the Malfestio is rarely disturbed. This is due to its two abilities. The first of these being its ability to cause monsters to fall asleep. Malfestio's wings, both the membrane and feathers, are layered with a specialized scale which allows it to fly silently through the night. The specialized sac of the Malfestio has produced a special narcotic liquid which it will spray out at foes using these scales. It creates an ultrasonic vibration which atomizes the liquid, meaning it is near impossible to see and therefore avoid. It will typically choose this method to fight off any individual wraths it comes into contact with, either to provide itself with a swift getaway or causing the wrath to fall asleep mid-fight. It will then plummet to the forest floor, walking away with a warning never to mess with a Malfestio or not walking away at all. The secondary attack the Malfestio uses is one entirely unique to them. Inside the scales of its feathers is a specific yellow property that causes confusion upon the monsters or hunters it afflicts. This method of attack is used on wraths found in pairs or so, and the packs of Yankutku that clutter some of the upper layers of the canopy. This confusion state primarily causes hallucinations, putting images of threats or dangers in the monster's head that aren't there. One notable spectacle that comes from this confusion is a single Yankutku seeing a Dilathodon in the place of its friend, attacking it and from there causing internal chaos, until one Yankutku remains, battered and bruised, ready for the Malfestio to use its sharp talons to claim the final kill. Never will a Malfestio see a more plentiful buffet in its life. The Scarlet Forest is an ecosystem ripe with plentiful greenery, and therefore small endemic life there lives in abundance, whether that be the likes of the leaf lugger ants or powbugs that cling to the vast amount of trees present, or the emperor hoppers, myriads, or quattreflies that simply fly from one place to another, minding their own business. Traditionally, this endemic life has not been bothered as much, considering the likes of Lalabarina, Doshiguma, Rathalos, Uthduna, etc. are all carnivores. The Yankutku is the only monster that longer offers them any kind of threat. However, researchers have discovered a slight decline in the population of these insects, and since no sudden outliers of young cuckoo population and or appetite have been documented, the prime suspect may be another monster present in many other forests within the Old World. The Quechua is a member of the Pelagus order, a primate-type monster that resembles a lemur more closely than a monkey, such as the case for Congolala or Blangonga, two other members of this order. The Quechua will spend the majority of its time doing one of two things, either foraging the forest ground for insects to eat and water sources to drink, or, for lack of a better term, will explore. These monsters are naturally curious, so will investigate different things foreign to them, mostly being documented wandering around the forest with no clear destination in mind for hours on end. They can sometimes be seen swiping away at trees in an attempt to grasp at some insects to eat, and have been witnessed by the Woodwards fighting a Congolala. However, from descriptions, it sounds a lot more like the Congolala clumsily swinging and flopping, whilst the Quechua uses its agile nature to quickly swipe fruit away. They thrive in areas where they are free to climb and swing freely, and so the forest provides them with everything they need. Food to eat, water to drink, plentiful places to live. However, quite like the Quechua that live in other parts of the Old World, some will decide to visit and live in the Lalabarina nest if it has been left unattended for too long. However, much like those that live in a Nersilla nest, it harbours great risk, as if the Lalabarina does return, it is rare that both monsters will walk out of the nest alive. The Quechua is a passive monster by nature. However, if the proper aggravation is presented, then it has no issue in a fight. If the Quechua instead wishes to scare off enemies instead of fight, it will curl its long ears over its face, the pattern giving the appearance of a menacing threat. One downside is the Quechua cannot see when this occurs, but because its ears are so long, the tips touch the ground, meaning the Quechua can still sense vibrations in the ground. Unfortunately, there are cases in which curiosity killed the Quechua, and it will unknowingly stumble into the nest of a Rathalos or an Uthduna, in which case the fight is unavoidable. However, its claws and tail, sharp and hooked for swinging and climbing, can cause some serious damage to hunters and other monsters. The trunk it uses to suck up water has a specialized organ that will store some, ready to be shot out as a mucousy glob at enemies, which will turn red if the Quechua is being fought in the fallow. Not something majorly important, but something Eric found cool nonetheless. The nature of the Forbidden Lands has shown many dominant threats throughout, from Arkveld bypassing nature's will, Zoshia almost eradicating all life in the Forbidden Lands, and the likes of Gormagala disturbing almost every ecosystem it finds itself within. There is one species, however, that hasn't yet been accounted for. The classification of Gormagala as of right now is Demi-Elder, suggesting that the Abyss unit is aware of the existence of Elder Dragons. As an extension of the Hunters Guild, it would be ignorance not to know, but as of the elimination of Zoshia and the rebalancing of the energy to the various locales, there were no known Elder Dragons present in the Forbidden Lands. A few months after, researchers discovered the corpse of an Uthduna. Smoke emitted from the corpse, suggesting a volley of Rathalos fireballs did the deed. Upon further inspection, the body of the Uthduna held strange branching scars from a few singularity points, making it seem like they had been struck by the Sandtide's lightning before stumbling to die in the forest. However, after the sun was blocked out and replaced with thin strips of bioluminescence, the researchers were never heard from again. As more of these instances occurred, samples were obtained, and data analysis confirmed the existence of Namiel within the Forbidden Lands. The Namiel is a rather passive Elder Dragon. However, much like the Quechua, once aggravated, will hold nothing back in offense. It has been witnessed to thrive so much better in the Scarlet Forest and the Coral Highlands or the Guiding Lands due to the sheer abundance of water that clutters the forest floor. Commonly, the Namiel is a fluorescent blue and orange colour when saturated with water. The main forms of attack the Namiel will use is to mix together the water it is absorbed with its saliva, making the water more of a viscous slime, that which it will strike with its lightning-infused wingtips to electrocute everything trapped within. As a last resort, the Namiel will disperse all the water it has collected around a large area, and then shock the whole thing at once. Doing the former too many times, or the latter even once, will desaturate the colours of the Namiel to a pale, greyish colour, signaling signaling its vulnerability. However, the Namial found within the Forbidden Lands are proving more deadly, as it will only desaturate itself if it performs its last resort attack. If it sets down smaller globs of watery slime, it will take significantly longer to desaturate it due to the constant water sources surrounding the forest. Being an Elder Dragon, the only real threat to a Namial is an Uthduna that gets lucky, a massively tall task due to the Uthduna only appearing in a downpour, a period in which the Namial will never desaturate for the obvious reason. However, if there is no such threat around, the hunters will remain entirely passive around the Namial. The Namial sees them as no threat and so tolerates the presence, and the hunter gets to enjoy a beautiful light show. During the fallow, the sap from the plentiful trees will flow slowly but surely into the streams on the forest's floor, giving it the striking scarlet color that gives the forest its namesake. During the fallow, endemic life seems less common. Aquatic life takes a back seat and in some cases disappears altogether. Due to this, larger monsters are also seen less frequently due to the lack of prey available or a distaste for the new water. However, the one type of monster that can be seen are the herbivores. The fallow, as the name suggests, does significantly impact the likes of smoke nuts, mushrooms and poison cups. However, they still seem a lot more present than the likes of sushi fish or bowfins. The state of inclemency, the downpour, has a distinct role in the forest water cycle, sifting out the sap-filled water and replacing it with new, clear water, almost cleansing it. This suggests, and is backed up by monster absence, that the sap is poisonous, or at least causes those that ingest it significant internal pain. Plants such as the maconeal tree, Aconitum napellus and the oleander are all plants that secrete sap capable of causing skin irritation, vomiting, blisters, and in some rare cases, death. However, Eric has made the relevant courtesy checks and discovered that the water is completely safe to drink for humans, and the water likely doesn't affect monsters too. There is, however, one monster in which the effects of the water are clear as day. The Scarlet Puke is a variant of the Puke that, like its relative, used to prevail upon the upper levels of the forest's treetops, adapting its color and using its bright orange and red feathers to camouflage itself within the forest's leaves, perpetually tinted with shades of red and orange. However, due to the presence of monsters such as Rathalos and Yankut-Ku, it has been forced down to the lower levels of the forest in order to survive, in an almost identical manner to the base Puke. The survival meant that the Scarlet Puke comes out only during the fallow and therefore required the ingestion of the sap-tainted water, the other reason for the color of its feathers. It doesn't come out during the plenty due to the likes of the Wrath, Stoshigum and Mizutsune, monsters higher in the food chain, all seeking the clearer water, displacing the Scarlet Puke, and it doesn't come out during the inclemency due to the Uthduna roaming the lower levels, creating no room whatsoever for the Scarlet Puke to thrive. The Scarlet Puke biologically adapted to separate the properties of the sap from the water into a much more well-adapted sac. The sap is filtered into a sac containing stomach acid normal for any Puke. However, the reaction of the sap with said acid, alongside the mushrooms and the poison cups of its regular diet, create much more noxious poisonous gas that can be expelled exclusively from its mouth and tail, either as a gas or in globs. It is also able to coat the end of its forked tongue in this poison, giving it the distinct radioactive green color on the tip. Throughout a fight, the Scarlet Puke may start to look a bit exasperated or lose the coloration in its feathers, either indicating the sap is near empty or the Scarlet Puke's intent to flee. Whichever option is the case, the Scarlet Puke will hastily venture towards the nearest water source or poison cup to replenish both its poisonous sac as well as its fighting spirit. The Oilwell Basin, a large volcanic ecosystem filled with vast cavernous regions, pits of tar, lakes of oil and plentiful thermal vents sprouting up from the earth to tower over even the highest of mountains, spewing out insane amounts of smoke and perhaps other gases as well. There are many different areas within the Oilwell Basin, the first and most prominent being the standard caves, stretching for miles yet seemingly in a circle, with hunters always finding themselves right back where they started if not too careful. careful. These caves, whilst hazardous to hunters with its harmful gas and explosive geysers, also provide plenty of tactical advantages. Slopes perfect for the spinning bludgeon, a variety of bonk boys, lumps of wormsbane for those looking to go monster bowling, and old rusted machinery of a long since past age, that which still works and still packs a considerable punch. Most of these areas contain lakes of a material called oil silt, a liquid-based solution that most of the endemic life within the basin, specifically the likes of Kranadath and Gelodron, consider the closest thing to a bath. The basin also contains the Forbidden Lands volcanic regions, ripe with lava and intense heat throughout the basin cycle, and home to the region's apex, the New Udra. Many of these areas are believed to be ancient abandoned workshops for the people of the basin, as there can be seen plenty of man-made machines cluttered about, some providing sanctuary for monsters, others as platforms to help travelers get from point A to point B. Pipes spewing the large amounts of tar, empty crucibles, one as such the New Udra calls home, and what appears to be large metallic bars scattered around, suggesting the basin was due to be so much more than a small village in a vast cave system. Speaking of the people inhabiting the basin, the habited area is called Azuz and is home to a proud tribe of workers. They work relentlessly day in day out to turn the extreme heat energy exerted from said volcanic areas into energy that funnel into a large machine known as the Everforge. When activated, the Everforge produces the region's man-made inclemency, the Fire Spring. Despite the fact that the Fire Spring is a man-made event, it is still considered a natural part of the locale's ecosystem. To the people of Azuz, the Fire Spring is a festival full of celebration and a chance to mine rare ores. To the rest of the basin, the area explode in flame, turning the barren, deserted caves and the dull oil-silt lakes into magma-filled volcanic landscapes, and all monsters lay wary of the dreaded black flame. Gravios is a monster that is common to the Oilwell Basin, and either normal or tempered can be found on almost every expedition, sometimes two at a time. They are relatively docile creatures, and considering they are typically the largest and most defensively sound monsters within any environment they inhabit, little to no monster nor hunter threatens them without the proper reasoning. However, as of recent, there have been instances of the people of Azuz recollecting on times they saw a Gravios roaming around the areas of the Oilwell Basin, however mysteriously missing its body. The Gravios is a near impenetrable monster, and so the skeleton takes a massive amount of time to decompose. So seeing a Gravios skull is nothing unusual to the tribe. What is unusual, however, is that when those investigating without absolute caution get hosed down by a fine beam of water, as the Gravios tends to use fire, poison and sleep, but never the water-based attacks. These unfortunate souls never make it back to Azuz, having startled and becoming prey of the Rust Razor Sainitar. Being a deviant of the Shogun Sainitar, the Rust Razor underwent specific ecological changes in order to adapt and become stronger and survive within the Forbidden Lands. Much like its cousin, the Rust Razor immediately sits quite high on the food chain within whichever environment it so chooses to inhabit, these areas traditionally being volcanic or mountainous regions, as opposed to the Shogun preferring marshes or woodland. It preys on most monsters smaller than it, choosing to secure a diet of mainly Gelodron, the small goober monsters that can be found everywhere, as they are considered a delicacy due to their high percentage of meat to bone. It's even been seen to prey on the likes of Rompopolo and in some instances an Ajarakan, and due to its unique double-sided claw blades, in extremely rare circumstances it has been seen to tussle with a New Udra. The Rust Razor prefers the Oilwell Basin as its home due to the Fire Spring providing the ideal temperature and humidity, not to mention the fact it provides the Rust Razor with an arsenal that most would be envious of. Rocks seem too heavy for the Rust Razor to lug about, so much like the old world versions have been seen rocking exclusively different monster skulls. It, as previously mentioned, will primarily clothe itself with a Gravios skull, using the mouth to spray out a concentrated beam of water at prey. One variation of this is that sometimes it will combine this beam with the oil silt, and if hit, will inflict hunters with a movement down debuff, severely decreasing movement. If the Rust Razor goes into combat with a New Udra and miraculously comes out on top, it will sometimes decide to don itself with the Apex's skull to give itself some fire ability abilities instead of the Gravios providing itself with the water abilities. It doesn't have a skull, it's a cephalopod. Don't be stupid, it's a cephalopod. It doesn't have a skull. However, documentation says that the most deadly version of a Rust Razor is one that wears a Glavenus skull on their back. The Glavenus skull has specialized teeth that the Rust Razor will sharpen its claws with, making the encounter much more deadly to prey and hunters alike. This all being said, in order for the Rust Razor to be roaming around wearing a Glavenus skull, surely the Oilwell Basin would need another resident. Throughout the old world, there is tale of a legend that is neither recognized as real nor refused theorizing. The tale of the Fated Four is one that has changed and altered and never remained the same throughout years of existence. Tales have spouted of four warriors clad in the armor of the Fated Four repelling a world-ending threat. Others believe that when the four meet, the world be fated by the result. Tales and rumors being what they are eventually spread far and wide to the Forbidden Lands, where the Kunafan people and the Keepers all forged their own stories of one way or another. The tribe of Azus, however, believe the Fated Four to be a list of monsters that all living beings are fated to encounter at least once in their life, a prophecy that most realize may be more than rumor upon seeing the glistening tip of a greatsword that does not belong to a hunter. The Glavenus too houses itself within the Oilwell Basin, mostly to do with the vast quantity of Gelidron in which to gorge itself on, but also because of the nature and qualities of the basin, making the Glavenus a monster that could rival not only the new Udra, but perhaps even an Arkveld. The Glavenus' main offensive threat would be, of course, its tail, a weapon that it has such a mastery of, it can effortlessly slice through almost everything it fights. During a battle, the Glavenus will occasionally put its tail in its mouth between four specifically designed fangs before sharpening its blade-like tail. This restores the tail's sharpness and makes it brand new again, ready to be used in another battle. When Glavenus sharpens its tail, it is removing soot and ore and swallowing it. The swallowed soot and ore is accumulated into its special flaming bursa, a furnace-like organ located in the throat. Being a monster of its caliber, the Hunters Guild needed not dwell in any hesitation to see any specific changes the Forbidden Lands may have gifted to the Glavenus. Unfortunately for them, the ecological changes brought about a realization that the Glavenus may be a much larger threat than it had been in the past. The nature of the soot and ore being stored in the bursa means that the Glavenus can leave small piles of saliva on the ground, infused with the soot to create a landmine almost, that will explode after a period of time. However, the Glavenus, specifically when enraged, will venture into the areas of the Oilwell Basin that contain the oil silt pools. When the Glavenus ventures to these areas, it will seem to deliberately coat its tail in the oil silt and then sharpen. The oil silt holds properties that will cause it to ignite if reaching a high enough temperature, which allows the monsters such as New Udra to ignite itself in battle. If the Glavenus ingests this, it will also get stored in the bursa and will act as a catalyst for the reactions within. The subsequent products created as well as the properties of the oil silt mean that when the Glavenus tail is then coated in the saliva, the tail will also hold explosive properties as well as retaining the ability to leave explosive saliva mines. This ecological adaptation has led the guild to classify an enraged Glavenus closer to a Hellblade, similar to how an enraged Mizutsune is classified by some as a Soul Seer under specific circumstances. As a monster being so intimidating and potentially threatening to the ecosystem stability, God help those that are fated to engage it in combat. The tribe of Azus are a humble people and have regularly invited the Avis unit over for feasts. The food of choice for these meals would be the Gelidron, a common small monster found within the Oilwell Basin, known for its incredible taste when cooked just right. Although over the past few months the number of Gelidron have seemingly decreased. As a matter of fact, the overall number of large monsters has seemingly decreased as well. Perhaps the culprit, ironically, can be considered a delicacy in its own right. The Ratnakadaki is a monster that is extremely rare to see, to the point that it may have been living in the Oilwell Basin long before the Avis unit arrived, and will likely be around a long time after they depart, yet to be seen. Mostly being female, these monsters will roam around with around 5 to 7 smaller versions called arachnoids stumbling around its climbing frame of a body. The Oilwell Basin would be a perfect place for the Ratnakadaki to live, mostly to do with the reproduction. The main organ of its body is the glowgut, a bright orb-like appendage that is filled with a flammable gas, that which is required to fertilize arachnoid eggs. However, to repeatedly do this, it must remain at a high body temperature, a condition the basin is happy to provide. They are extremely fierce creatures in their own right, with some cases in the faraway land of Kimura being documented of a Ratnakadaki scaring off a Rathalos with its sharp claws, and has even been suggested that elder dragons or similar level threats are a fierce fight. This is due to multiple factors, the main cosmetic one being the gown of silk it covers itself in. This gown is capable of absorbing many blows which protect the Ratnakadaki's frail frame. When this silk is shot out as a fine line, it can either hold hunters in place for long enough for the monster to launch an attack, or it will throw a Arachnoid away with it. The Arachnoid are scarily strong for their size, and are able to pull the Ratnakadaki to their location, either allowing for swift maneuverability in battle or swift getaways, using the abandoned machinery of the basin as cover. It has such a mastery of shooting these silk strings and placement of Arachnoids that some fear it may eventually bear a likeness to the slingers, allowing Ratnakadaki to utilize the environmental aids such as the ancient forge. Being in the Oilwell Basin, it's only natural that the Ratnakadaki has adapted to its surroundings. It will use its claws with the power to break wyvern shells, but a new method of attack will come from the younglings. The Ratnakadaki is able to secrete the flammable gas from within its glowguts through its mandibles and hooked spikes. It will pump this gas onto a Arachnoid before launching it at prey, coating the line of silk in the same gas before igniting the whole thing, causing a chain reaction with the oil silk to create explosions similar to Rompopolos. However, this does cause blast flights in the process. Through environmental evolution, the increase of Ratnakadaki does unfortunately mean the reduced number of Gelodron. However, through either sheer genius or sheer stupidity, an Azu's tribe member discovered what some other faraway tribes may have already learnt. The meat of a male Ratnakadaki is considered a delicacy in its own right, and is far superior to Gelodron in taste. It is so sought after that the Azu's members constantly provide optional quests to hunt one, just so they can taste its quality. Kranadath are the resident pain in the arse small monster in the Oilwell Basin, taking issue with any hunter or large monster that encroaches on their territory and attacking if it interrupts their feeding. They typically feed on Gelodron, mostly because it is the only reliable food source. Rarely will you see a Kranadath pack seek to take down an Ajarakan or a Gravios, for example. However, the Oilwell Basin remains remarkably clear of leftover Gelodron meat and bones, a phenomenon that seems undeciphered. Bones would remain in the oil silt for much longer than is projected, and the large monsters wouldn't satiate themselves fully on whatever a Kranadath leaves behind. So what if the reason was another small monster, a scavenger that is rarely seen, perhaps due to it drilling from underneath and then retreating back under the surface? Perhaps there is a larger version that does the same for large monsters. The dots connect to one culprit. The Agnacta is a monster that typically sits on the top of the food chain in volcanic environments, feeding mostly on smaller monsters, sometimes deciding to dine on young Ajarakan or rats. Common monster knowledge would point to the Rompopolo too, but they seem to be too skin and bone for most with a high protein diet. It has the remarkable ability to hold its own against larger monsters, for example the Tigrex, Lavasioth and Brachydios, using its ability to coat itself in molten lava that solidifies over time to create a near impenetrable armor thanks to the inflammable substance between its scales. This technique is only really seen in the lower areas of the basin, as there lies the more concentrated pools of lava, whereas when in the higher areas it will swim around in an almost erratic manner, sweeping through the oil silt in an effort to cover as much in it as possible, collecting large pools around hunters as traps before clearing to a safe distance and igniting it all with a fiery beam attack. Anything caught in this would take heavy fire damage. However, if threatened by anything they deem a major threat, for example a new Udra, Arkveld, or a particularly avid hunter, they will retreat to the lower levels again, and will drill into the floor and walls before leaping out from the ceiling to attack, lunging up from the floor or attempting to melt the threat with the aforementioned beam. Whilst in this area, the Agnacta seems to be more fluid with its attacks, consistently being rid of the armor. However, when near death, this could be seen as an act of desperation. Due to its lack of armor, its offense is a lot higher, but its body is consistently more vulnerable, almost showcasing its last stand. Whilst the Agnacta is an incredibly dangerous monster, it actually has an incredible amount of practical application. If a hunter drags one to a Zeus, then you may see an Agnacta drill made from the beak. Gemma is in the process of pitching an Zeus garment laced with the scale substance so that the tribe never need to worry about catching fire again, although due to the nature of their living situation and occupations, it received, ironically, a frosty reception. The Forbidden Lands remains a part of the old world, and so throughout countless generations of hunters, the vast majority of research and knowledge regarding monsters, their physiology, ecology, behavior, diet, preferred habitat, even the nickname, resided from this part of the world. The New World and the 5 fleets that ventured over provided a further expanse on the vast database of monster knowledge, even creating some new tabs of its own. Most people, however, do not realize that the world is far more expansive than they realize. The Wyverians are one such group to understand the scale of this, as a few members that reside in Suja remember another place that they once may have called home. A faraway land they migrated from due to perilous rampages consistently putting them under threats every 50 years of their centuries-long lifetime. A faraway land some may know as Kamura. As life will always find a way, it seems it is not only the Wyverians to have migrated from this land to the Forbidden Lands, as researchers continuously present pictures or samples to these Kamuran migrants in hopes that they have some idea of what monster may be posing the new threat. One such circumstance warranted all of Suja's goings on to halt, and to commission hunters to put an end to this monster's tail. The Almudron's most unique and fascinating adaptation is its long tail, which pans about half the Leviathan's length. At the end there are feather-like appendages which secrete a golden liquid, presumed to be some kind of acid. This liquid is capable of dissolving solid earth into a muddy mire. The same can be said of its newly discovered subspecies, the Siltstalker Almudron, thriving in the oil silt lakes of the basin, bearing a remarkable likeness to the base bar its lighter grey coloration with radioactive green accents, a difference that occurs, research theorizes, due to a unique reaction with the fumes exhausted from the many large chimneys during the fire spring. As previously mentioned, the main event of any Almudron species is the tail, and it holds a great many purposes for the Siltstalker's survival. Almudron by nature are carnivores, and so follows the dietary plan of every other carnivore in the basin. Large monsters on rare occasion, but in almost all cases, Gelladron make up a brilliant buffet. Through passive observation, the Siltstalker has observed plenty of Hammerbros flaunting their mighty charge move, captivating the Gelladron in an almost hypnotized state, and so it will too flaunt its tail in a similar manner, luring the Gelladron for a clean and risk-free meal. The second and arguably main purpose of this tail is founded in the secreted liquid. The regular Almudron can secrete an acid-like substance that allows it to turn landscapes of Earth into muddy swamps by dissolving the ground. However, the Siltstalker has adapted an entirely opposite effect. This environmentally adapted liquid instead binds onto the oil silt and solidifies it, making the surroundings more hazardous for prey and the Siltstalker's arsenal much more deadly. In terms of offense, this is utilized to coat its tail in solidified oil silt, making it more like a hammer or in some cases a mace, as well as solidifying portions of the ground, freezing hunters in place to allow for free damage unless the hunters' continued efforts to escape is too powerful, or their palico gives them a gentle nudge. For defense, this ground solidifying can also be used as a quick means of escape, but the Siltstalker will also slather itself in oil silt, which solidifies into a makeshift armor, almost like a Graviosh shell. Whilst this armor does provide quick and easy protection, it is also significantly weaker than most others, and can be broken either by prolonged raw damage, or immediately after contact with any form of fire damage, whether that be weapons, torch bombs, or other monsters. It retains the passive behavior of a normal Almudron, preferring to live in wetter environments and staying relatively secluded in isolation. If anything encroaches on its territory or prey, it will attack and attempt to kill without second thought. This, strangely enough, will include the likes of New Udra. However, as the apex has shown with its cephalopod nature, attempting to stop it with solid objects rarely work. The Grand Hub is a central plaza of hustle and bustle for hunters. The village of Suja Peaks of Accord are home to a small population of Wyverians led by the Allharken. The Wyverians are an ancient people, once being housed in some other land. However, the people that once worshipped them set aside and discarded them. Exiled, the Wyverians found a new home, a land that swallowed their grief and anger, teaching them that even that is part of the ever-evolving ecosystem. They are also a highly religious people, holding plenty of celebrations in a smaller area, the Grand Hub. This place of worship, once available to hunters, acted as the main source of downtime entertainment. Activities such as barrel bowling, arm wrestling, performances from the diva, and showing off a hunter's fashion, either intimidating or cosplay, all take place here. However, this area shares a similarity with the rotten Vale of the New World, of all places. Surrounding the Grand Hub lies the remains of a monster, a skeleton that is far too big to be anything present in the Forbidden Lands currently. Or so we thought. The only skeleton that this could be is that of Dalamadur, a massive elder dragon snake wyvern that houses itself on the highest peaks of mountains, a place that Suja just happens to be, hence the title Peaks of Accord. When a Dalamadur reaches near death, it will travel to the Vale, as has happened with a previous member of the species, but that only makes it stranger that a Dalamadur skeleton makes up the foundation for the Grand Hub. One, because there are no other detailed circumstances of a Dalamadur dying naturally anywhere other than the Vale, and two, because this would seem to be its natural habitat, perhaps its home, suggesting the previous generation of hunters required new trousers. Dalamadur are known to rise up from underground at certain parts of the year, and all require a home. Through whichever reason, initial discovery, territorial disputes, or otherwise, a Dalamadur finds its way to the Peaks of Accord. The Allharken recounts a tapestry that has been passed down through plenty of Allharken generations, a pair of Dalamadur existing within the realm of this area. One, a mother, will tolerate the juvenile, and so tale tells of it venturing off in search of food for its young, a Lao Shen Lung, or something it would have to go far to find. The other, the young, that existed in the Peaks of Accord long before the Wyverians, suggesting perhaps that is the reason the Grand Hub is a place of worship, is because the young Dalamadur was the worshipped being. However, what they had not accounted for are the hunters of previous generations, cordoning off the area and hunting the beast. Defeating Zoshia presents means of returning to the now Grand Hub, where the Wyverians have paid homage to the Dalamadur, creating a kind of church in the remains, with the diva recounting tales in song of the legend during the night. But when the mother returns to see the ruins made of her child's skeletons, with the Wyverians and present generations of hunters eating, drinking, and celebrating therein, it paints her the wrong picture. Enraged, and with previous documentation of being extremely hostile to hunters, the adult Dalamadur attacks, threatening not just to force the Wyverians out of another home, but perhaps the entire scale of the Forbidden Lands. The Iceshard Cliffs is a brutal, snow-covered region where freezing winds and relentless blizzards shape the towering ice formations and sheer cliffs. The region's jagged peaks stand tall against howling storms, making navigation treacherous for hunters and explorers alike, made even worse by the unusual gravitational phenomena unique to the region, causing rocks to float as either platforms or environmental hazards, making venturing in these areas near impossible for anyone without the help of a seacraft. Snow blankets the land with visibility often reduced by swirling frost and biting winds. Despite the harsh conditions, unique wildlife has adapted to the extreme cold, the likes of Comanche, Rathma, and Porker Plume being some of the endemic life found throughout. With the weather being as extreme as it is, the endemic life and monsters found are the only ones adapted enough to survive. There are no primitive species regularly present, except for one, a wandering, well-spoken woodward that, much like the region's weather, took hunters by storm. Rove, as he is known, is a curious little thing that can either be seen roaming about the region for rare items to trade, or being caught up in some trouble, requiring hunters' help to relieve him from some Nacilla webbing.
Now death greets me with a new mask, or are you my salvation?
It is rare to see any sort of life around the Iceshard Cliffs when its inclemency arises, known as the frost winds. This state of weather increases the ferocity and biting coldness of all the storms that plague the region. Endemic life finds shade indoors. Hirabami decide to sleep through, whilst the Jindahad, the region's apex, roams free. The Jindahad is normally reserved to the area known as the Rime Chain, the deepest depths of the area where hexagonal formations can be seen. Obviously not something naturally occurring, so again hints at the pre-existence of an ancient civilization. However, sometimes the Jindahad will poke its head out to say hello, showering everything inside with a piercing veil of frost, one that most monsters would rarely walk out of unscathed. You'd think that with his age and adventures that Rove would have some stories to tell of the Jindahad, but even he knows best to leave well enough alone. On a little side tangent, unfortunately, as much as I'd like to say that Gammoth should return as Mizutsune has made it back, and I've already theorised the likes of Astalos and Glaminus, I have tried to think of whether Gammoth could come back in a normal / Elder Frost enraged state, but that would require, in my opinion, for Gammoth to exclusively be found in the Rime Chain, an area that would supplement her size. Almost exactly how a large portion of portable 3rd or 4 ultimate encounters with Gammoth and Elder Frost were to happen in the Polar Fields, an area where Ukanlos normally resides. But it wouldn't make sense for wilds, as the Jindahad inhabits the Rime Chain and wouldn't tolerate any territory invaders. Although hope is not lost, as developers have said that they could perhaps rescale her or make a baby version. On one hand, good, because we get to see the fated fallback in full force in new gen colours, but on the other hand, bad, because bringing back baby Gammoth would likely mean the return of her natural predator. Throughout the Forbidden Lands, fanged beasts seem in plentiful number. The Doshiguma can be found within the Windward Plains, the Scarlet Forest, and the ruins of Wyveria, with the Guardian version also being found in the latter. The Ijara Khan makes its presence known in the Oilwell Basin, however the Iceshard Cliffs seems to have a distinct lack. Yes, it has a few resident Blangongas, however this monster sits relatively near the bottom of the food chain. There is one monster, however, that takes the spot of the Iceshard Cliffs' dominant fanged beast, a monster that to the Hunters Guild has migrated from a faraway land, and to the Keepers is a long-distant relative of the Doshiguma, isolated in a strange new environment and forced to adapt in its new harsh conditions. A monster that is known to some as the Gos Harag. It stands relatively towards the middle of most food chains, and it will constantly hunt on prey like the Rathma, even large monsters like Gypsaros, Hirabami and Blangonga. However, like its Kamuran version, will struggle to fend off the likes of Jindahad, Gormagala and Arkvel. Despite this obvious difference in strength, the Gos Harag is extremely territorial and will fight to defend its home against any opponent. Gos Harags have a large body, which makes them more formidable as a fanged beast than the Blangonga, and while sharing some similarities in the Ice Breath attacks, the Gos Harag can utilize it in many more inventive and deadly ways. It will, like most others, use the Ice Breath attack to cover a wide area and freeze prey in place, making for an easier kill, but it will also consume the cold air from its surroundings and coat its large arms with them, creating either a greatsword or a hammer. Using these weapons, it will beat its prey into submission. However, despite its size and the glass cannon-like behavior, it is surprisingly nimble, able to dash around and leap large distances at staggering speeds for its size. However, the Gos Harags found in the Forbidden Lands have a different attack style to those hunters may have faced before. Despite its appearance, they are surprisingly intelligent creatures, and the hunter's theory of Gos Harag seems true within the Keepers, as the Gos Harag is no longer bound by two forms of attack. Through however many battles or however much scouting, the Gos Harag is able to wield a multitude of weapons. Sometimes it will stick to the hammer or greatsword, old reliable. It may graft a lance onto its arm for tank and offense, perhaps a sword and shield to hold a mid-ground, or even some door blades to put hunters on the back foot. A different weapon for a different circumstance. Whilst these attacks are standard and cause ice blight if fought in the frost winds, the air surrounding the Gos Harag is a lot colder and a lot denser, therefore the weapons hold different properties. They take on a more solid, spiked appearance, and they are a lot harder to break, deal more damage, and now inflict extreme ice blight, which, as well as causing stamina to decrease rapidly, also cuts the stat clean in half. Since a fight with a Goss Harag is normally a marathon and not a sprint, choosing to deal with one in the Frostwinds may be a one-way trip to an early grave, courtesy of the Limb Reaper. Turf wars are a regular occurrence, not just in the Iceshard Cliffs, nor in the Forbidden Lands, but the entire scope of Monster Hunter as a whole. One-sided battles like Deviljho vs Kulu, even matchups such as Velkhana vs Malsino, or even complete obliterations such as the Rajang vs pretty much anything. It is a common expectation that in any form of environment there will be those looking to take what is not theirs, and most of the time this results in fights, more likely than not to the death. However, it was not thought possible that turf wars could occur with monsters specifically in their infant stages, as the Nursilla hatchlings of the Iceshard Cliffs now find themselves having to deal with a rival gang of young, the Gigi. The Gigi will clutch onto anything to feed, grow, and develop poison. However, the likes of hunters aren't around unless they have to be. Rove is far too caught up with a full-grown Nursilla half the time, and any large monsters would eliminate them immediately. So the only logical food source for a young Gigi in the Iceshard Cliffs would be the Nursilla hatchlings found in abundance. However, these hatchlings, lacking any real threat, rely on numbers for security, both sides taking heavy fire when feeding time arrives. When a Gigi is full-grown, it turns into a Giganox, a solitary monster that will stick to the cliff's lower-level caves and use its heat-sensing organs to find and kill prey. An ideal location for a heat-sensing monster, since it is unlikely that anything except a living organism radiates any heat at all. This, most of the time, will be Blangonga or the Blangos, however will sometimes prey on whatever wanders too far into the caves, like Gypsaros and sometimes Nursilla, shades of its youth. They are unusually intelligent creatures compared to other flying wyverns, and will sometimes kill a troop of Blangos not to eat them, instead leaving the pile in plain sight for either the Blangonga to discover or a larger monster to stumble upon, unknowingly becoming the Giganox's next meal. Those encountering a Giganox likely do not make it out alive, but those lucky yet unlucky few remember more about the Gigi, as once they sense prey they relentlessly chase and drain the life out of it. Distinct characteristics commonly described by these unfortunate, traumatized souls are a white, faceless monster lunging at them with a mouth filled with sharp teeth, its only defining feature. They never mention the size. The Iceshard Cliffs hosts a remarkable phenomenon. Some sort of shift or lack of a gravitational presence results in rocks floating throughout, allowing for both sea grats to traverse the harsh environment, or if the hunters so wish they can use their slingers to pull said rocks towards monsters and cause serious damage. Whilst most hunters efficiently utilize the offensive reward of these rocks, they also critically underestimate the risk. As easily as they can use the rocks as weapons, so too can the monsters. One such monster, the Legiana. They are incredibly intelligent creatures that, whilst not in combat, float through the zero gravity like an elegant drone through abandoned buildings. The Legiana species are typically native to the Coral Highlands, however during certain periods of its life cycle will migrate en masse so that it can breed. It has previously only been documented to happen in the Hoarfrost Reach, but there could be the chance that they instead migrate all the way to the Iceshard Cliffs, both areas being colder, mountainous terrain. In the Iceshard Cliffs, the Legiana retains its title of being one of the top predators, however only when in the higher layers, as it relies on its ice abilities in battle, an ability that it loses when poisoned. This means that Legiana's engaging with the monsters like Gypsaros and Nursilla is near impossible to see, only choosing to fight and prey on primarily the Rathma. However, if said Rathma seem too few, it will utilize the blue secretory glands that connect to its freezer sacs to free smaller large monsters like the Yankutku and Blangonga in place before swiping at them with its talons. Said talons are sharp, and its legs incredibly strong for lifting prey. However, this changes nothing about the diets, as the monsters it can lift, Gormagala and Argveld etc. all have the ability to fly, making dropping them from height irrelevant, and the Jindahad is entirely out of the question. When dealing with these monsters and hunters, however, it will attempt to use the same freezer sacs to freeze hunters in place, but since they can easily break out, the Legiana sometimes will resort to some underhanded tactics. As the Iceshard Cliffs are more of a series of walkways and platforms, the Legiana will consistently float about effortlessly, and will sometimes fly full full force into any one of the floating rocks, sending them hurtling towards its opponent. This attack acts more like a double-edged sword though, as it either incapacitates the opponent for a long period, or will knock them off the walkway all the way down to the caves housing the Nursilla, an area where Legiana don't dare venture. The Iceshard Cliffs is not only home to some large and small monsters, but as an ecosystem it also houses plentiful endemic life and, more importantly, plant life. The foliage of the Iceshard Cliffs is a massively overlooked part of the locale circle of life, as it was thought that only the likes of Rathma and Porkerplume feed on them. However, after traces of shed skin could be found surrounding the piles of excite shrooms, snow herbs and mandragoras, to name a few, the guild investigated and found the culprit to be a monster that no one in their right mind, on initial inspection at least, thought would be an omnivore. The Zamtrios inhabit colder environments wherever they are found, for example the Darge snowfields and the frozen seaway, housing a second layer of skin under their outer layer as an extra layer of heat and for when the skin sheds. They live not quite exclusively on mushrooms, plants and nuts, but will also go hunting after smaller monsters like the previously mentioned Rathma and Porkerplume. If it chooses to go after a large monster, then it will pick and choose wisely, such as a lone Blangonga or a juvenile Hirabami, as the larger monsters have the capabilities to seriously injure, if not kill, the Zamtrios. Its main asset in battle are its three forms, which it will use at different points. The first being the standard fight, never exhausting the energy it holds. The second being, for lack of a better term, the suit of armor it will don when its body temperature drops low enough. It constantly secretes a special fluid from its skin that hardens when cooled, creating a razor-sharp layer of frost armor around it, cleaving anything that so much as rubs up against it. This armor is normal as is, but will appear a lot faster and increase in durability and deadliness when fought in the frost winds, as the temperature plummets, freezing the fluid almost instantly. It will activate its third form either when it feels threatened or as a last resort, expanding its body several times its normal as an attempt to intimidate any potential predators, although on the downside this does make the Zamtrios a lot more lethargic and vulnerable. At the end of the day, as Rove will tell you, if one wishes to venture through this frozen wasteland and spies a fin swiftly approaching, assume it is a threat, as despite the Zamtrios preferring mushrooms, all monsters are carnivores if the right conditions are met. The Doshiguma is a large bear-like monster that inhabits the Windward Plains, the Scarlet Forest and the ruins of Wyveria. However, when in the plains they can be commonly seen as a pack of 4 or 5, as the people of Kunafa found out one eventful evening. As is the case with other pack mentality animals like lions, gorillas, bears or mandrills, the dominant hierarchy states that any male member can challenge the alpha for the right to become the alpha. Doshigumas are no different and will honour this tradition. This fight is often long, arduous and brutal, and in 95% of cases will lead to death for one of the combatants, but there will always be one that reigns supreme. It can be seen that when fighting a Doshiguma, it will go into an enraged state, seemingly almost expanding its muscle mass so much to the point that it creates wounds all over its body, like the skin is starting to tear itself apart. Doshigumas that use this method of fighting almost always win the alpha fight, but in that rare 5% of cases, the Doshiguma uses this method, lose the fight, but isn't killed, brutally beaten up and left for dead, yet still breathing. The Doshiguma understandably has lost everything, but that only means that they have nothing to lose, and so will exile themselves to the Iceshard Cliffs, finding a cave to live in solitude, licking its wounds. The Lone Wolf Doshiguma, as it is now called, is a deviant that has noticeably more scars all over its body than almost every other monster, sometimes more than tempered monsters. Having increased their size in the fight, they are noticeably larger than the normal Doshiguma, some being previous alphas and some being foolish wannabes wanting a taste of leadership, although this could also be explained by the Doshiguma growing a much longer, thicker coat of fur to account for the cold of the cliffs. One consistent marking of a Lone Wolf Doshiguma is their face, looking a lot older, more grizzled, lethargic in combat. But once they fight enough and learn the lost art of the dominance hierarchy, they pump adrenaline like crazy and they hold nothing back. They are a lot more aggressive than normal Doshigumas, throwing about their weight and putting some real power behind their punches. However, after a prolonged battle or too many strikes, it will fall back onto the defensive until it can regain its energy. In terms of diet, they will continue to hunt for prey, the likes of Blangongas and Hirabami, the latter because some theorize it's jealous of its ability to to stay cohesive as a pack. It won't be successful every time it hunts, being too used to having 2 or 3 allies or scrounging off of one of said allies' kills, but when it does succeed, it enjoys a peaceful meal in its cave, free of the constant disputes of the pack. Researchers on passive observation of the lone wolf Doshiguma are unsure if the beast enjoys its quiet, solitary lifestyle, free of argument, or slightly misses the family dynamic that kicked him out so long ago. The ruins of Wyveria are what's left of a once great capital and is now a forgotten civilization. Once a center of power and innovation, all that remains are crumbling structures and lingering traces of the past. Recently, Olivia uncovered evidence of an unusual phenomenon within these ruins, as well as signs of a Lalabarina, a woodland species, foreign. Its unexpected presence hints at something mysterious. Despite its dilapidated appearance, the ruins are instead a sprawling ecosystem full of life, albeit the life in question seems to be 50% standard monsters. Rathma and Porker Plumes remain in plentiful packs. Monsters like the Zuwu adapted to feed on the Guardians, and large amounts of tempered monsters like a Jarakan, Gravios, Quemitrice and Gypsaros can all be found here, either kicked out from their original locales or venturing here for a true top of the food chain fight. The other 50% are the aforementioned Guardians. These monsters are much more threatening than their base counterparts, not having any reproductive organs or requirements to eat or drink. These monsters can theoretically live forever if they continue to absorb the energy from the Wilk found in abundance throughout the ruins. Only by unnatural means can these Guardians be put down. They are a species of construct made by the ancient civilization to act as sentry and protection for the civilization, giving it its namesake as Guardian. However, with around 250 different known species of monster, it would seem a waste to limit the large monster Guardian counts to only 6. As it turns out, the ancient civilizations still have a few tricks up their sleeve. There are monsters out there that are able to wield weaponry, and not like Glavinus or the Duramboros. Instead, these monsters use third-party materials as weapons, and one such monster is the Kulu Yaku. The Kulu are a relatively docile species, not interacting with other monsters unless provoked or frightened. Being such a non-threat, with a diet almost consisting exclusively of eggs, the researchers of the guild wondered why the Kulu would be on the ancient civilization's list to be chosen as a guardian. However, the Guardian Kulu is, whilst capable of fighting, more utilized as a scout. It has an incredibly sensitive nerve-filled beak, which can be used to detect even the slightest of changes in environments and locate hidden objects. The reason why the base can find eggs, rocks and pots so well. Using this beak, the Guardian Kulu is able to dig up any potential rare materials the ancient civilization would have used for technological advancements, or locate any potential underground threats posed by monsters or opposition tribes respectively. However, there will be the occasion in which the Guardian Kulu will need to fight back, and it will not shy away from the battle. Using the very well developed pectoral muscles it boasts, it will dig through and pick up boulders anywhere as heavy as 300 kilograms. However, if continuously threatened, it will increase its arsenal and instead dig up one of the large chunks of Wormsbane located throughout the ruins. Using this, it will smash it on opponents, causing smaller explosions but dragon blight all the same, before throwing the chunk and dealing massive damage. Whilst being invincible to nature's wrath, if it is attacked, it is still just as flimsy, which is why it will wait for as long as it can before stopping the escape plan and going on offense. Although if the fight has gotten that far, it might as well be too late for it already. Since the Guardian's main purpose is to defend the ancient civilization, it would make sense, at least to me, to try and prove why certain classes of fighter should make their return in Guardian form. Guardian Kulu Yaku would take on the role of a scavenger, and the current Guardians in Folga Anjanath and Ebony Odogaron feel more like a DPS class, and so joining them is a monster the ancient civilization adapted to best exist in the ruins. The Wyvern Milk, or Wilk as it is known to the Avis units, is the substance allowing Guardians immortality. However, when imbued with certain elements, the Wilk develops extremely volatile properties, as is best documented with the Guardian of the Dragon Torch, Zoshia, when it creates solid crystals out of the Wilk. Shooting them with a dragon pod or shock pod causes them to explode so violently that it causes a chain reaction with all of those surrounding it. Another monster that creates a substance with explosive properties would be the Brachydios. Another DPS class Guardian created by the ancient civilization continues to house the slime mold within its body, a sort of myxomycete, which can be used two separate ways. It will continue to utilize its saliva as a sort of stimulant for the slime, causing its hands and horn to be consistently covered and make it explosive on impact, as is shown by its fluorescent yellow coloration. However, when in regions of the ruins rich in Wilk, it will attack predators by punching the ground in calculated spots, causing Wilk crystals imbued with the slime mold to rise up from the ground, that which after a few seconds of separation from the Guardian Brachydios can cause the whole thing to go up. That is, unless a hunter shoots it with an elemental pod first, causing the explosions to happen when they are free of the blast. Whilst this may look like a turn in the tables, the Guardian Brachy confirm the explosions and continue offense, as its skin is similar to that of a thermal flask, able to withstand massive amounts of heat and cold, and is armoured enough so that it can withstand the explosions with little to no damage. Whilst the theory still circulates that the slime mold can exist without the Brachydios, some scholars believe it is actually a property of the Brachydios shell that causes the explosive reaction. However, with the abundance and volatility of the Wilk, this theory still remains disproven. The Guardian Rathalos is a construct based on not only one of the most popular monsters of the Old World, but of the New World, and even as far away as Kamura. Being such a flagship, it has not missed a single appearance, and every single hunter that has ventured to one world or the other has fought one. The Guardian Rathalos may seem a DPS to the untrained eye, however, in order to fully utilize its Rathalos roots, it instead plays the roles of a ranged fighter, shooting fireballs when it can, large sweeping fire breaths that ignite and explode the Wilk veins its previous attacks claw up from the ground. Another Guardian monster utilizing a ranged moveset to detonate proximity explosives left by previous attacks would be that of the Guardian Seething Basilgeuse. The main asset of the Seething Basilgeuse has always been its explosive scales, an egg-shaped part of its biology that can detach and detonate thanks to a product dubbed the distilled blast fluid. Normally the scales would eventually grow to a large purple-coloured mass before exploding, but with the Guardian Seething Basil, the scales, when primed, will instead glow a blinding bright white as the Wilk the monster absorbs combines with the blast fluid. Whilst this is purely a cosmetic change, the Wilk found underground reacts with the scales when they explode, causing one or two extra explosive rings to fan out from the original detonation. In turf wars, it has, according to documented instances, rarely lost a fight if ever, and so the continued nickname of Great Calamity still holds true. The iconic roar make the keepers hide indoors for a period, and even keep some hunters shaking in their freshly smithed Zuru boots. Despite its title of Guardian, the guild are still extremely wary about the Seething Basilgeuse, as one misplaced bomb could mean the destruction of a wall or support, bringing down the entire ruins on top of the keeper's home silled. Even worse, if a bomb goes stray and hits the land spine, that could risk the depletion of energy from all the locales, and perhaps puts the entire Forbidden Lands at risk of extinction. One quick way to deal with a Guardian Seething is to continuously target its scale-making organ. Continuous damage will cause the heat of this area to dissipate, and the explosive properties will also disappear for a short time. That being said, the Guardian Seething Basil still has the extremely powerful shock absorbers in its neck, so will still dive bomb hunters, some of the time while they're being hunted, but sometimes whilst the hunter is hunting or doing something else entirely. You know, just out of instinct. Guardian Doshaguma is a large, sturdy monster that, as you'd imagine, carries many tropes of the normal Doshaguma. These monsters take the role of tanks, large blocks that, whilst hitting hard, also take a lot to take down. Monsters like these are not hard to come by, but finding out the right one takes time and effort. The Wyverians have hardly been a common species in Monster Hunter. The likes of humans and palicos have outnumbered them in every circumstance. However, the likes of Legend, the Seeker, and the Allharken all provide plenty of depth to the world. One such Wyverian Wyverian that had perhaps more a story-centered part was Kagero the Merchant. Kagero is a well-traveled merchant, suggesting that he has been to plenty of regions, perhaps ones we currently inhabit, selling off items such as food to the Knafans, tools to the Azuz tribe, and perhaps long ago, monster materials to the Wyverians of the old Wyveria for them to get the requirements to construct guardians. And so came to be the Guardian Garangol, a monster that secretes a sap-like fluid from its pores to promote plant growth and harden soil for offense. Its title as one of the three lords of Elgardo made it a prime specimen for a guardian, and combined with the Wilk makes it a formidable enemy indeed. The Garangol's main form of attack was to drench one of its arms in soil, inflicting water blight, and the other one in a magma-like substance, inflicting fire blight. Instead, with the Guardian Garangol, the fists are imbued with the substances found in the ruins, one taking on an explosive blast blight property due to the Wilk combining with the sap, and the other being plunged into the ground, ripping out a fistful of Wormsbane, causing serious damage with its new Dragon Blight. Much like the Guardian Kulu though, the Guardian Garangol will remain docile, choosing to sleep as often as it can, but if provoked in any way, it will use its massive body to crush everything in its path. It has become quite the celebrity within the guild though, mostly to do with its ability to help the plant life of the ruins flourish again, but Gemma has sparked quite the debate with Eric as to who would win, one Guardian Garangol or 100 men. As previously discussed, the Guardians are a specific subset of monsters classified as constructs. They are artificially created monsters with enhanced senses and abilities bioengineered by the ancient civilization in order to protect them and the Dragon Torch, and so do not follow typical monster ecology. They do not need to eat, drink or sleep, and simply nourish themselves on the Wilk flowing in abundance. This is the only known substance they require to survive, and so unless unnatural causes occur, this suggests they are immortal. However, the basic genetic foundation of the original monster needs to be present in order for the Guardians to be created. As such, life will find a way to bypass potential roadblocks. One such example is Guardian Arkveld, a Guardian based on an extinct species that genetically circumvented its own data and ended up feeding and reproducing, albeit too much for its own good and the good of the ecosystem surrounding it, causing the guild to issue a kill order. Another, the Indominus Anjanath. A massively old and battle-worn Guardian Folgaranjanath that genetically mutated and reverted to primary settings, almost, while still keeping its Guardian abilities. It is unclear how this mutation happened, and the guild is unsure as to whether it is a 1 in a million chance, or if continued exposure to Wilk eventually breaks down the Guardian's firewalls. Blue blood still runs through it, and it still feeds off the Wilk to patch its wounds and live forever, but it also has the instincts of a normal Anjanath, actively going out and seeking prey to hunt and eat. There are recordings of this monster actively hunting every single other monster that has had any presence in the ruins since the Avis unit's arrival, even Zuwu and Arkveld's. Its main abilities include being able to maintain the normal Guardian Folgaranjanath moveset, except heavily overhauled, now being able to expel a large electric beam in a similar manner to the normal Anjanath's fire beam, and being able to coat its tail and claws with electric power since it has such a mastery of it over prolonged existence. The name Indominus comes from the Latin word indomitus, meaning untamed, ungoverned, or unrestrained, symbolizing the Anjanath's relinquishment of responsibility from the ancient civilization, instead being its own master and guardian to no one. It is extremely territorial, most of the time being found on the lower levels of the ruins near the cocoons so that it can get a quick and easy snack when one of them hatch. If, however, no cocoons hatch for a certain period of time, it will venture up to the higher levels looking for more food. The size of this monster, typically twice the normal size of a Guardian Folga, its extreme aggression and seemingly indiscriminate prejudice to attack means that these monsters are automatically guild authorized and should be put down as soon as is physically possible. 6 months ago, the Forbidden Lands was subject to one of the greatest world-ending threats the Old and New World had seen. The Guardian Zoshia was guardian of the Dragon Torch, a large, likely unlimited energy source that the ancient civilization used to power the Guardians, as well as supply energy to all the locales in the Forbidden Lands. Zoshia, instead of protecting the Dragon Torch, instead siphoning off of its energy, caused not only the unexpected inclemencies in all the locales, but also the rampage of Arkveld, all in an effort effort to break free of its cocoon and wreak havoc all across the Forbidden Lands, destroying it all. The hunter, instead of choosing to let Nata destroy the Dragon Torch and as a result cut off all the energy to the locales, decided to break Zoshia out of its shell and kill it to preserve the land and the energy flow. However, Zoshia may have seemed familiar to a fair few hunters. Large, white body with the ability to regenerate, shooting out fireballs as well as piercing red lightning. Whilst there are plenty of theories suggesting that Zoshia may have properties of Safi'jiiva, Elatriel and Safi'jiiva, for example, the indomitable bloodlust that Zoshia shows can only be the result of one monster's roots. Being a construct based on, most theories suggest, the white fatalis it shares in its need for destruction. The ancient civilization once thrived in a city, a once great capital capable of plentiful technological prowess. However, much like the fate of Castle Shrade, the city was destroyed by a fearsome monster with a seething hatred towards all life, stemming from the ancient civilization slaughtering its kin, and therefore leaving Wyveria in ruins. However, some Wyverian soldiers managed to sample some hair off of the monster, which the civilization, with the technology they had left, was able to create Zoshia. Destroying Wyveria only halted the plans of the White Fatalis, as those that survived found refuge in Suja, Peaks of Accord. However, within the peaks lies the Grand Hub, and within the Grand Hub, a white-dressed girl, the Diva. Theories suggest that the last sighting of a White Fatalis came from the will of another white-dressed girl. Since monster Wyverian resonation is no foreign prospect to the world, reports say that the Elder Dragons Narwa and Ibushi have done the same thing with two Wyverian sisters, Minoto and Hinoa. It may be likely that the White Fatalis, driven mad by its fury towards all living things, ruined Castle Shrade and then continued its rampage to Wyveria before thinking that all life present had been eradicated. Until 6 months ago, Zoshia was slain, but not before more Zoshia specimens started to appear in the ruins only 2 months later. This increased availability of Zoshia would mean an increased amount of energy drawn from the Dragon Torch, and therefore draw out more monsters like Arkveld. There was one other person to emerge as the Zoshias did, the white-dressed girl, the Diva. Resonating with the beasts, she performs night after night, whilst providing hunters with buffs and heals. Her soft-spoken song may hold a more sinister secret. She has gained the hunters' trust as they continuously dance around as she performs, however perhaps drawing in a threat none of them could ever comprehend. They're happy arm wrestling, drinking and barrel bowling, all whilst the ancestral dragon draws nearer to finish the job he started so many years ago. And there we have it. 52 pages, over 17,500 words, and 27 monsters I think could realistically return or debut in wilds based on their ecology. Again, this is what I think based on what information I can get my hands on. If anything is proven, disproven, false, retconned, etc., please just let me down easy about it. I've really enjoyed writing, recording and editing this longer form video essay style content, and whilst it doesn't have any breaks for funnies, I think it's just as good as, say, the wish lists I made a while back, which you should definitely watch. If any of these entries have forged your own opinions, developed theories, or had you create your own list, then please let me know down in the comments. And whilst you're there, please do consider giving that subscribe button a hit. But here's to the Wilds DLC. We've still got a few title updates to go through first, but I for one can't wait. Thank you all again for watching. Bye-bye.
Oh, he's a pretty cool video.